They say the first thing humans ever wrote wasn't a word. It wasn't even written. It was shaped, miles wide, measured in light and stone. And if you know how to look, you can still read it. Before humanity had words, it had space, the quiet language of distance, direction, and design. Long before anyone wrote a poem or scratched a symbol into clay, people were already speaking through what they built. The first sentences weren't written with ink or carved into tablets. They were streets, walls, and axes of stone, whole ideas arranged in dust and sunlight. Civilization began to communicate not through speech, but through placement, where homes stood, where temples rose, where the sky met the ground. A courtyard wasn't just an open space, it was a statement about community. A temple's height wasn't just aesthetic, it was a conversation with the heavens. Every structure carried meaning before language could name it. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats stacked their stories toward the gods, rising like prayers in brick. In the Indus Valley, the grid of Mohenjo-Daro followed the cardinal directions, quietly insisting that order itself was divine. Walking those streets was like reading a belief system without a single word written down. And then came the grid, humanity's first deliberate sentence, the moment when geometry stopped being cosmic and became civic. When people began shaping land into straight lines, they weren't chasing efficiency, they were declaring control. To draw a grid was to say, this space means something. Babylon's layout mirrored the stars. Teotihuacan's main avenue stretched like the Milky Way. Chinese capitals faced the cardinal points to align emperors with heaven. Every street, every courtyard, was both instruction and declaration, a spatial manifesto telling people where they belonged in the cosmic order. Urban planning became the first form of mass communication. To build was to tell a story you didn't read but walked through. The temple at the center said what mattered most. The walls around it told of fear, protection, or pride. The streets leading to a palace whispered ambition. Jericho's walls spoke of survival. Athens's Acropolis held a dialogue between gods and citizens. Rome's roads spread like an unfinished sentence, stretching its empire's will across continents. Even now, cities speak in the same old tongue. The grid beneath your feet, the skyline above you, all of it carries echoes of those first stories written in stone. Architecture remains memory turned physical, a language that predates words but never stopped speaking. The first sentences weren't heard. They were measured, drawn, and walked. Stories told not in sound, but in space. Before empires ruled through armies or decrees, the Indus Valley mastered a quieter power, governance through design. In cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Lothal, and Dholavira, order replaced authority. There were no kings, temples, or thrones, yet everything worked with remarkable precision. Streets ran in perfect grids, houses followed the same 1:2:4 ratio, and measurements stayed consistent across hundreds of miles. It was as if geometry itself ruled, not men. Their city plans mirrored the cosmos, aligned north to south and east to west, creating harmony that reflected equality. No building rose above another, no palace dominated the skyline. The symmetry wasn't for show. It was social architecture, proving that fairness could be built, not just declared. Beneath their feet lay covered drains and sewers, the world's first sanitation system. Every home had access to cleanliness and dignity. Their laws were built into brick and street, not carved in stone tablets. A Harappan brick fit a Dholaviran wall because shared standards replaced central control. Trust became their architecture. What's most striking is the absence of violence or vanity. No wars, no palaces, no monuments to power. Their civilization thrived through embedded intelligence, a democracy of design that lasted centuries. In the calm ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, every line and shadow still speaks that truth. Real civilization doesn't command through fear, it builds through understanding. Before democracy was written into law, it was built into space. After the silent order of the Indus, Greece carved its ideas into stone. The Greek polis wasn't just a city, It was a lesson in how to live. At its center stood the agora, an open field of thought where words were as valuable as goods. Farmers, philosophers, and citizens gathered to debate and reason as equals. There were no thrones or barriers. Conversation itself was the act of governance. For the Greeks, architecture was moral. Geometry wasn't decoration. It was fairness made visible. Every balanced column and measured ratio reflected justice and order. Their temples embodied reason. Their layouts mirrored harmony. The city's proportions were ethical as much as aesthetic, a geometry of equality. Athens perfected this vision. The Parthenon stood not as a fortress, but as a symbol of shared identity, overlooking markets, theatres, and homes arranged for participation. The polis was philosophy mapped onto geography, sacred at the top, civic at the centre, communal at the ground. Every structure invited engagement, theatres that embraced their audiences, council halls sized for honest debate, homes that faced each other to spark connection. Democracy wasn't a vote. It was a daily experience, something you walked through and practiced. The Greeks proved that power needed no walls. A city's openness could be its constitution, its symmetry, its justice. The polis was democracy, drawn in lines and light, teaching that freedom doesn't have to be declared when it's already designed. While Greece turned geometry into philosophy, Africa had already turned it into life. Geometry wasn't drawn here, it was lived, passed through generations in the way people built, gathered, and believed. Where Greeks prized symmetry, African builders found beauty in recursion, patterns that repeated and evolved at every scale. Courtyards echoed courtyards, compounds mirrored kingdoms, and each layer honored the one before it. Geometry wasn't abstract, it was social, shaping how communities understood lineage, space, and belonging. These cities weren't rigid grids but living systems. Streets followed the land's contours, houses curved like branches, and every form adapted to its environment. What seemed spontaneous was actually a precise, adaptive geometry, design in dialogue with nature. At Great Zimbabwe, dry stone walls ripple through hills in flowing arcs, fitting perfectly without mortar. The great enclosure folds into itself like power made gentle, authority expressed through sequence, not dominance. In Mali, cities like Timbuktu and Djenné blended trade, faith, and form. The Great Mosque of Djenné rises like a breathing organism, its rhythm repeating from spike to shadow, a mathematical heartbeat turned sacred. Among the Yoruba, the family compound, or Agbo Ile, began with one courtyard, the heart, expanding outward as families grew. The pattern wasn't imposed, but emerged, repeating itself like memory. Markets and neighborhoods followed the same rhythm, each reflecting the other in nested harmony. Across the continent, the same logic appeared in Ethiopia's rock churches, Ndebele murals, beadwork, and textiles, recursive art anticipating algorithms. African geometry prized continuity over control, rhythm over rigidity. Every structure, from hut to city, moved and breathed with life, proving that precision could live in curves. Africa's architecture was philosophy made tangible, a belief that order doesn't need straight lines to be true. Its geometry spoke a timeless truth. Life repeats, but never the same way. A pattern forever growing, adapting, and remembering itself. Today, our cities hum with power, but not purpose. Skyscrapers rise, traffic pulses, lights blaze, yet space no longer teaches. It merely contains. Buildings impress rather than express. We measure growth, not meaning. In the past, geometry carried life. Streets could symbolize equality. Shrines mapped heaven to earth. Indus bricks taught discipline. Athenian columns taught balance. Yoruba courtyards told stories of family and lineage. People didn't just move through cities, they read them. Geometry was ethics made visible. Now, cities feel like chaos with no story. Malls, offices, and screens have replaced communal spaces. We scroll instead of speak, consume instead of commune. We build for deadlines, codes, and profit, not alignment, connection, or purpose. Architecture has become algorithm, reflecting busyness, not belief. But meaning can return through intention. Buildings can teach humility, streets can invite dialogue, plazas can remind us of shared life. Cities could grow like Yoruba compounds, expand like Greek agoras, obey nature like Indus water systems. The goal isn't nostalgia, it's designing with awareness, turning architecture back into language. The first sentences of civilization were written in walls, not words. The next great civilization may not boast taller towers or faster trains, but cities that move us emotionally, giving streets a soul again, letting the city finally speak back. Maybe the cities we live in are still trying to talk to us, but we've forgotten how to listen. Because once upon a time, the ground beneath our feet told stories of equality, and the skyline mirrored our dreams instead of our deadlines. So the question is, when the next civilization rises, will its buildings remember who we were, or just how fast we built?